from the classes that we've done in this series, so we have spoken once or twice about Hasidic Rebbe's, and other times we've spoken about Lithuanian rosh yeshiva. And I hope at some point in the series to give a little bit background on the Hasidic movement, so that there's some framework within which to understand where such major differences come between Hasidic Rebbe's and between the Lithuanian type rosh yeshiva, which, unless you're from a Hasidic place, most of the yeshivas today, even unless they're Hasidic, in America, I would say, if they or their fathers didn't come from Lithuania, but the way that they learn and their ancestors did come from Lithuania. So the yeshiva system is really the Lithuanian yeshiva system, which we've spoken about in the past. And then the Hasidim have their own yeshivas, and the way of learning is different. The schedule of the day is different. They're both very rigid. And the way that a Hasidic Rebbe interacts with his Hasidim and the way a Rosh Yeshiva interacts with his students oftentimes is different. I will say that since Hasidus started in the late 17th century, many things have changed. There have been, as does everything in the world, but there have been many revolutions within Hasidus, okay, that have changed the face of Hasidus. And on the other side, there have been changes in the yeshiva world as well. Well, I would say, and it's not just now, I would say it's ready for this way for decades, probably since World War II, that the two sides are coming closer and closer, so that you'll have Hasidim who undertook customs from here, ways of life from here, and the other side that undertook things from the Hasidic world. So aside from the dress, that you'll see obvious differences between the Hasidim and the non-Hasidim, they're not as far apart as they used to be, although they do look that way, right? Like in the yeshiva world today, they dress black and white. When I was a kid, it wasn't like that. I think I've told you one of my favorite cartoons. I have it hanging in my house. Is these Hasidim are saying Tashlich, and on the other side of the pond, there's a bunch of penguins standing there, and they talk to each other. Say, I don't know how they tell each other apart. So it's interesting because in the yeshiva world, it's more or less black and white. In the Hasidic world, they're actually the nuances of the differences of the dress is much more pronounced. A person who doesn't know what it is would not pick up on it. But I want to talk Hasidic garb today, although there's much to be said about Hasidic garb as well. So today I want to talk about somebody by the name of Rabbi Avraham Yehoshua Heschel. Now, Abraham Joshua Heschel was a well-known Torah observant Jew who associated with the conservative movement in the United States, and he was a genius. And he was himself a descendant of a great Hasidic dynasty. But I'm not going to talk about him. He was associated with the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, and others, and he wrote a very important book on Shabbos called The Sabbath and Island and Time. He was also, many of these people from that Heschel family were geniuses. This man who I'm going to talk about, his name is also Avraham Yehoshua Heschel. Heschel is the family name, and he was a descendant also of a great Hasidic dynasty, which really expanded and took root in many, many different cities. This happened oftentimes as Hasidus grew. I'll give you an example right now. The Vayishlach Rebbe of Muncie, his last name was Hager. I don't know, 8-10 years ago. I know he was alive in 2014. So a few years after that, he passed away, well into his 90s. And he, in Muncie, New York, he actually developed a Hasidic community, a very large Hasidic community of Vayishlach Hasidim. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Vayishlach is Romania. Okay, I could be wrong, but maybe it's Galicia. But and when he died, he left over 8 sons, and none of them, they were not youngsters. They were all worthy of being rabbis. So what did he do? Like is going to be a fight, which unfortunately happens in the Hasidic world, happens in the non-Hasidic world as well. While he was still alive, he appointed each one to be a Rebbe or a Rosh Yeshiva in a different place. This one was in London, and this one was in Jerusalem, and this one in Antwerp, and this one in Muncie, and this one here. So that when he died, all 8 had their own. Some were larger, some were smaller. But that's one of the ways where Vizhnitz Chasidus sort of, spreads out. Now his brother, the older Rebbe's brother, Rabbi Moshe Hager, was the Rebbe of Vizhnitz in Bnei Brak, and he passed away 15 years ago. And he had 2 sons. It's quite an interesting story. And both of them became Rebbes in Bnei Brak. And one of them has a much larger crowd than the other, but the other one has a significant crowd as well. So Vizhnitz Chasidus, which again, there was almost nothing left after the war. The Rebbe survived, but there was almost nothing left. Today has Hasidim the world over. Kapichnitz was it was in Galicia. It was a small town, and this Rebbe, he was born in the town of Husiatin. Husiatin was actually his grandfather was the Rebbe of Husiatin, and he was born there. And Kapichnitz exists today. There is a Kapichnitzer Rebbe. There may be in the world a couple of small Kapichnitzer shuls, but it's not really a major Hasidus. It's small. It is what it is. But they have had throughout their long and illustrious centuries of being Rebbe's in different places, some very, very, very great people. And one of them, as we're going to talk about today, is Rabbi Avraham Yehoshua Heschel. He was born in Husiatin in 1888, and he got married in 1909. He was very old at 21. During World War I, his family moved from Kopyczynitz to Vienna, and his father was still Rebbe. When his father died in 1935, he took over. He was in Austria and Vienna, and he continued with the Kapichnitz Chasidus in Vienna. And he was Rebbe from 1935 until his passing, I think, in 1969. In 1939, he had already been taken. The Nazis had made it into Austria, and we'll speak about it if we get to talk about some of the stories with him over there. He had already suffered terribly, but he did make it to America, and he had a small shul, he had a shtibel in America, not a lot of Hasidim, but somehow, because of his greatness, his name became very well known. And it became well known by other Rebbes, it became well known by rosh yeshiva in America. Now, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who we spent three sessions talking about a few months ago, Rabbi Aaron Kotler called him the Gadol Hador, the giant of the generation in Chesed. Now, one thing and I don't have a horse in this race, okay? Because I'm not from Hasidic blood, and I'm not from Lithuanian. I'm from New York. No, I'm full-bred German descent. I had one great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather may have been born in Hungary, but I deny any Hungarian association. So I'm only saying that because what I'm saying that is not as a member of one side or the other, but usually, not always, for somebody to become a rosh yeshiva, even if they take it over as part of a dynasty from their father or from their grandfather, whoever it may be, usually in the Lithuanian world, one has to be worthy of the title. Sometimes somebody takes over and may not be so scholarly and not be such a great leader, which is why they say that the Hasidic Rebbes love to have sons, because for the Hasidic Rebbes to have sons, they have to, again, you don't necessarily have to be worthy. You just have to claim that you have the merit of your ancestors working for you. Now, that being said, there were many, many Hasidic groups that had many generations of great, great people, but they like to have sons, because then they know that could have somebody who's Rebbe. They say that, it's a joke, but in Lithuania, I'd like to have daughters, because you can pick your sons-in-law. You can't pick your son. Right. So, you could pick who the next Rosh Yeshiva would be. The Kapichnitzer Rebbe may have been a great scholar. He absolutely is not known for that. He was known, Rabbi Aaron Kotler called him the giant of the generation in Chesed. he was known for his astounding Ahavat Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew, love of Hashem, and for the chesed. We'll talk about that today. The chesed that he did with other people. Again, he came here in 1939, and he was known in the ways of some very few earlier Hasidic rabbis, especially of Chaim Tzanzer, who was not an ancestor of his, never to leave charitable funds in his home overnight. Meaning, he got a lot of charitable funds. He made sure when he got it, it was distributed on that day. He would not go to sleep. He would not keep tzedakah money in his house overnight. And if somebody's going to need the next day, so God would have to provide to make sure that it's going to come the next day. And we'll see that he lived with a tremendous level of trust in Hashem. When he went to Eretz Yisrael to visit, he would distribute huge amounts of money in Eretz Yisrael. I guess there he did keep it overnight because he had to take it to Eretz Yisrael with him, right? And also, we spoke about Chinuch Atzmoi, the independent education system of the Orthodox, of the Torah community in Eretz Yisrael that was established by the Chazon Ish and by Rabbi Aaron Kotler. Rabbi Aaron Kotler and he worked together with Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky and the Minsker Rebbe to raise funds for Chinuch Atzmoi, and he was very, very active on behalf of Chinuch Atzmoi, which still exists today. As you know, they do receive some funding from the government, but they have to raise tremendous amounts of money when most of it is raised in the United States. Okay. Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who worked very closely with him, felt so highly of him, and Aaron was the head of the Lakewood Yeshiva. Lakewood Yeshiva was much smaller, obviously, it's been a little smaller. I think when Rabbi Aaron died, there was 150 to 200 students, and today there are 10,000. Yeah. And he died in 1962 or 63. But it was known that when one of his students would get engaged, he would send his students to the Kapichnitzer Rebbe for a bracha, for a blessing. Now, one of the things about Hasidic Rebbes, and this is one of the ways that it's crossed over, there were Hasidic Rebbes throughout the history of Hasidus who were known that their blessings were efficacious. They were effective. Their prayers were accepted. They were great people, and their prayers were accepted. And people used to go to them all the time for blessings, as people used to go in our time till 4 years ago when he passed away. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he was the furthest. Well, actually, he wasn't the furthest of Chassidus. His great grandfather was a Chassid, but he was not a Chassid. But people treated him like a Chassidish Rebbe at the end of his life. Tens of thousands of people came from all over the world to ask for his blessing. The Kapichnitzer Rebbe would give blessings to people. I'll not say every time it was fulfilled, but people felt that he was such a holy and special man that that Rabbi Aaron Kotler, the greatest Lithuanian rosh yeshiva of his day, sent his students to the Kapichnitzer Rebbe, and he knew the Kapichnitzer Rebbe well, for a blessing. I will tell you, my parents and my grandfather was not a chassid, but because my mother was born in Switzerland, and our family, my mother's family, goes back in Switzerland to the 1600s in Endigen, Switzerland. They go way back hundreds of years. It's really interesting because that also came from Germany and they retained many of the German customs. But my great-grandfather had a bunch of sons, amongst whom was my grandfather. At the time, there were no yeshivas in Switzerland. So he sent them to Hungary, to different yeshivas. Now, most of the yeshivas in Hungary were Hasidic yeshivas. My grandfather and his family were not Hasidim, but many of my grandfather and his brothers, who were my great uncles, picked up many Hasidic customs through that. So one of the things was that when my mother, Aleh Shalom, and her siblings got engaged, my grandfather sent them to the Kapichnitzer Rebbe for a blessing. So my father, who was a full-bred Yekka, a real German Jew, he went to the Kapichnitzer Rebbe. There was two things, actually. I don't understand exactly what it is, but there's one thing it's called that they went to the Rebbe for a haskama, that he should approve the shidduch, not before they started dating, once they were engaged, right? And the second thing was, if he approves it, then he gives a blessing. So I don't know on basis of what he would approve it. I don't know. Like insight, special information that they were granted. But I will tell you, my mother's sister, she's alive and well. Can I know? She's 95. When she got engaged, she what they did was they write their names down, their name and the name of their father and mother, whatever, on a piece of paper, and they give it to the Rebbe. You should give a blessing to them. The Rebbe looks at it, and this aunt also married a Yekka. She married, my uncle was from Frankfurt. And he looks at it, he says, can't do this shidduch. Now, that doesn't sound, when when you take a couple, I don't know, they call about 60, 70 years ago in love, but when you take a couple who's engaged and about to get married and say, no go, as Rabbi Palatnik says, when you do that, whether it's dealing with an intermarriage or whether it's dealing with something like this, right? Rabbi Palatnik used to say, it's like going to a psychiatrist for people who are crazed and trying to talk them out of the craziness when they're already there. It's already too late. You should have tackled it earlier. This is not the time where you can tackle it. But he said no. So he looked at the papers, and I don't remember if my uncle's name was Yosef or if it was Mordechai. I don't remember. But the Rebbe said, you have to change your name to Mordechai Yosef. And he did. And he went from just one name to two names, and he said, these two names, it certainly was a Kabbalistic thing. I don't know what it was. From a Yekisher rabbi, you would have never had anything like that, right? But he looked at it, they changed his name, and then he approved the shidduch and gave him a bracha. So it's just an interesting thing on how, now not all Hasidic Rebbe's work like that. And certainly the older time Hasidic Rebbe's, now as we always say, they're greater than the Rebbe's today. Maybe in some ways, yes, maybe no. We have who we have today, and they had who they had then, yes.
What was his name before?
I don't remember if it was Mordechai or Yosef, because I knew him as Mordechai Yosef. I knew him as Uncle Max.
Oh,
the Rebbe didn't look at Max, so everyone did his name. So he added a name, but I don't know which name he added. Okay, I don't know what his name was before. So, but even if they hadn't listened to him, if you go to a Rebbe for that and he says something like that and he doesn't approve of it, you're scared to get married. It's like putting a kibosh. It's like you don't want that curse going with you. So he gave them a way out, and he told them that he should change his name. And when Rabbi Aaron Kotler was asked why he sent people to the Kapichnitzer Rebbe, he said, because the Torah was given to the Jewish people in order to purify us, right? In order to purify people. That's what the Gemara says, that the mitzvahs of the Torah are given to purify the people. The Kapichnitzer Rebbe is a pure person. And therefore, I believe that his brachos are effective because he is a pure and holy person. And that, again, this is the greatest Lithuanian rosh yeshiva of his time saying that about the Kapichnitzer Rebbe. We also have spoken in the past about the Ponevezher Rab, right? We did a few on him and the yeshivas that he built in Bnei Brak, and first in Ponevezher and then in Eretz Yisrael. He once came to America in the early years of the yeshiva fundraising, and before he left, he came to visit the Kapichnitzer Rebbe, and he broke down crying. And he asked the Kapichnitzer Rebbe asked him why he's crying. He said, I've been in America for months. I have tremendous debt, and I've been here trying to raise money in the 40s, and he says, I've been unsuccessful. I'm going to go back. I don't know how I'm going to keep my institutions open. The Rebbe left. The Kapichnitzer Rebbe got on the phone, and he raised over $10,000 right away. He got the cash, and he told his son, bring me over to the Ponevezher Rab, where his lodging is. And he walked over to him, and he put the cash on the table. We don't know if he took out loans, if he got donations. We don't know. He said, Ponevezher Rab, here's you. Now, $10,000 in the 1940s was worth at least $10,500 today, right? But that's the type of person. He couldn't see the Ponevezher Rab in such pain. But more than that, he wanted to help somebody, and he found a way to help somebody. And in his lifetime, he accrued tremendous debts in order to be able to help other people. We also, interestingly, it just happens to be that in this series that I'm reading about him, that some of the people that we've spoken about in the past and we've done maybe 6 or 7 or 8. I don't remember how many we've done so far. And some of them we've done 2 or 3 sessions on. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he was the second person that we did after Rebbe Kanievsky. He once came when he was, the Kapichnitzer Rebbe was once in Eretz Yisrael. He came to see the great Lithuanian, at that time, Jerusalem, Rabbi Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, one of the great halakhic authorities, who was maybe 20 years his junior. So after he visited, Rabbi Auerbach, who was already known in Israel to be one of the great scholars, again, he must have been at the time when Rav Shlomo Zalman died in 94 at age 84. So and he died in 69. So Rav Shlomo Zalman must have been a man in his 40s, maybe in his 50s, and the Kapichnitzer Rebbe came to visit him. And when they left the house, Rav Shlomo Zalman walked him down the stairs to his house, and he was out there for a waiting. They were waiting for a cab. So Rav Shlomo Zalman went back inside. He was 20 years younger than the Kapichnitzer Rebbe. He brought him a chair, right? So I just want to show how great God-fearing people live. I don't live this way, yeah, and very few humans do, even great people. He wouldn't sit down. So he said, Rebbe, why not? He was an older man, right? And he wouldn't sit down. So he said, my father taught me that before doing anything, one should reflect on the fact that it will be recorded on film in heaven, film in quotes, right? That means there's nothing that you do or say or that goes unnoticed. God knows everything that's going on. He said, I've worked all my life maintaining that awareness. He said, how would it look? What kind of picture would it look if I come up to heaven and there's a picture of me seated while you, the great Talmud Chacham, are standing? So he lived with that awareness. He wasn't being falsely humble. He said that the great Talmud Chacham, doesn't matter that he was 20 years younger than him, you are one of the greatest Torah scholars in the generation. I cannot be seated here while you're standing because that picture is going to reflect poorly on me. There's another story that came there was a Hasidic Rebbe who survived the Holocaust. He came to America, and there were two Askonim, they were community-oriented leaders. They came to the Kapichnitzer Rebbe, and they said to him, this man came, and he doesn't have any Hasidic garb. Maybe the Rebbe has an old hat that you can give him, so that we should give him the dignity of being able to dress in the clothing that he would like to. So the Kapichnitzer Rebbe went over to the closet, and he took out a brand new hat that he had just bought, and he gave it to him. He wasn't there. The people were there standing there, and he gave it to them, and they gave it to the other Rebbe. And his children, the Rebbe said, they asked you for an old hat. You just recently got this hat. And he said the same thing. He said, everything in life is on film. He said, and also our sages tell us that the mitzvahs that you create in this life, that's going to be your garb. Now, understand garb doesn't mean this, but that's going to be your garb in the world to come. He said, how is it going to look in the garb in the world to come if I'm wearing such an old, if I'm wearing a brand new hat, that's not going to be very new garb. So I gave him that. So, but this old hat is going to be like a brand new hat in my garb in the world to come. Again, you have to understand. But just the fact that that's how he thought when he did things. In order to be able to do a chesed for someone else, he lived very, very much with that reality. I don't remember who it was, but once he was sitting in his sukkah. This was in America. The Rebbe was sitting in his sukkah, and he walked into the backyard or wherever it was, and there was nobody there. So he decided to go into the sukkah and see if the Rebbe was there. So the Rebbe was sitting alone in the sukkah, and he had a tehillim open in front of him, and he was crying copiously. He was like copiously. He was just like crying and crying. And this man walked in, and he said, "What's the matter, Rebbe? What's the matter?" So the Rebbe said, a woman was just here. And she told me that her son was sick. And if I could help her, how can I help her? Her son is sick. The only thing that I know, she's my sister. It was a woman who he didn't know, or maybe. He said, what else can I do? It hurts so much that her son is so ill. All I could do was open up my Tehillim and pray. And that's what he did. I told a story similar to this about the Chavetz Chaim, that someone came into the Chavetz Chaim, and there was a question. He didn't know if he should go to the back to the yeshiva, or if he should join at that time the maskilim, the enlightened Jews who turned out to be not so enlightened. But he walked into the Chavetz Chaim. They told him to wait, and he heard the Chavetz Chaim wailing, this rabbi asked the family, why is he waiting? He said, because somebody came from the village the next town over, and there's a woman in labor who's suffering terribly. Chavetz Chaim doesn't know, but he's davening for her. And when this man heard that, he said, I don't have to speak to the Chavetz Chaim. If this is how a person in this world cares about a fellow Jew, that's where I'm staying. And he did. So these people who had incredible amount of Ahavat Yisrael, that's how he felt. People pray for other people. So you say their name. Sometimes, if you know them better, you put a little more imph into it. I mean, these people gave their hearts and souls, right, for others when they davened. So I want to tell you a very, very beautiful story that was told. It was in 1938. Somebody from America, somebody came to America from Austria. He had come in 38, and right after the Rebbe came in 39 or 40, a man walked into him, and he was very distraught because he had come to America, but he had left his wife behind. He was trying to get documents for her to come. And every door that he had tried was closed. And it was during the war. And he came to the Rebbe who was distraught. He couldn't put himself together. He said, the Rebbe said, what's the matter? He said, I've tried everything. And I'm going to commit suicide because my wife is there. And if she's not going to make it, I've tried everything. I can't live without her. And if she's going to be there, my life is not worth living. So the Rebbe looked at him and he said, I promise you that your wife will be back. She'll be here back in America in 2 weeks. Right? 2 weeks to the day, the wife arrived. So they asked the Rebbe, he went to he said, how did that happen? You know, because about some Hasidic Rebbe's, they say they're miracle workers, and maybe some of them are, or some of them were, right? But he said, how did you? So the Rebbe said, listen to this. And again, it's what he's writing in the book. It's not the exact quote, but this is, right? I'm no wonder worker. It's not within my power to perform miracles. That being so, you must surely want to know how I was able to promise him that his wife would be here in 2 weeks' time. He said, I saw his profoundly depressed expression and realized that his life was endangered. As you had told me, he told me he was thinking of committing suicide. I thought things over and reached the conclusion that since there was a danger to life, my first priority was not the wife. My first priority was the husband, because he's right here and he's ready to take his life. So I had no other way of pulling him out of his depression other than by promising here that his wife would be here within a limited amount of time. So I had to promise him that his wife would be here. So basically what he was saying is, I was buying 2 weeks, right? That's what he said. So he said, after I'd given him the promise and he left my house, I picked up my Tehillim. You should know the power of Tehillim when we do it really seriously. And he said, I started crying. And I said, Master of the universe, Rabbeinu Shalom, you know that I have no other way of saving this man from ruin other than by giving him the promise that I gave him. I'm asking you, please don't make me into a liar. I'm going to say to him, and you listen and accept my prayer. You're all powerful, so please bring about that which I have promised, and I can't bring it about myself. Apparently, the Rebbe said, God had pity on me. He didn't want me to be exposed as a fibber who makes unfounded promises, so he accepted my prayers. Right? We call that a miracle by the Rebbe, but he didn't look at it like that. He said, I prayed, right? He said, I'm no wonder worker, and I didn't actually do anything, right? So that's an incredible story. The wisdom that he had on how to, at least for the time being, bring some light to the husband's life, and then to pour out his heart in such a way that God listened to him. You know, whether he would listen to everybody like that, it's probably if you poured out your heart like he did. Yes, I would imagine.
That's about Emunah. I think.
No, I think that's Emunah.
Oh, just.
I think it's a very high level of Emunah. Now, does that mean always that it comes out the way you want to? Part of Emunah is that, yes, God can do it and he will do it, but if he chooses not to, that's his will also. Right? I heard a very beautiful story. At the dinner table, we studied different books, but I studied with my wife. So we happen to be doing one on Emunah now, on faith and trust in Hashem. And there was a beautiful story that my wife read to me this week, that it's a story about Rabbi Palm. Rabbi Palm, of blessed memory, was the Rosh Yeshiva in Tarvadas. He probably died in the early 2000s. And he was a great, great man. The yeshivas in New York, and he came to a wedding once where he officiated at the wedding. And I don't know whose wedding it was, but the bride's father had ordered a very, very expensive ksuba, which, in my opinion, which nobody asked me, it's a waste of money. Right? It's like I was something to have nicer, but to spend a lot of money when it's a legal contract, which with divorce today, at least she gets to keep the ring, but she's not going to keep her ksuba, you know, if it doesn't work. And it was very, very expensive. And Rav Pam is at the wedding, and he looks at it, and it was written incorrectly. Couldn't use it. Couldn't use it. So he says to the father, I don't know what this cost you. Again, I'm making up the words, but you can't use this. And he wrote out, he took a piece of paper and he wrote out the ksuba. And the father was distraught. Again, I don't know how much he spent on it. I don't know the story behind it, but the father was totally distraught. And Reb Pam saw this, and he leans over and he whispers something into the father's ear. And he goes back, and the man picks up his head and he smiles, and he was fine. And they asked the father later, what did Reb Pam say to you? Like you were distraught. The distress was so clear. And here he said to me, apparently it was decreed in heaven that your daughter needed 2 ksubas. But usually 2 ksubas means that her husband is either going to die or she's going to divorce. This way, you fulfilled it with the pain of the ksuba not being done. She has her 2 ksubas and the marriage will be fine.
Oh.
So the wisdom to be able to come on. Is that the absolute truth? I have no idea. That's irrelevant. It's the wisdom and the caring to be able to do that, to be able to say that shows such a caring and a sensitivity to others. I just love that story. This is the first time I'm telling it, but I'm sure you'll hear it from me again. Here's another interesting story that involves David Ben Gurion, and the beginning of the story is interesting, and the way the story plays out is interesting. When the Rebbe lived in America, one of his daughters married a boy from Eretz Yisrael. Now, what happens is oftentimes that when a young man gets married, even today by the Hasidim, by many of them, I've spoken to Hasidic couples, literally, for the first year, every night, if they live close to the parents, they'll go eat by the parents, by this set of parents, by that, every night. I don't know how good it is for them. That's how they do things. Remember, they're very young when they get married. And they have the parents' support and have it for at least a year. But the Kapichnitzer Rebbe said, he told one of his sons or one of his gabonim, he said, I would like you to please have my son-in-law come. I want him to spend a year with me because he's not of the Kapichnitzer group, but he married into it. I want him to become familiar with our customs. Some he'll take on, some he'll not. But he's in the Hasidic family. It's not just, you like the Mets, I like the Yankees. I mean, the customs are very, very serious things, deep, and he wanted him to come. But there's a problem, because even back then, in the early 50s, when there was a deferral for rabbinic students in yeshiva to be deferred from the army, they're not allowed to leave the country. If you have a deferral for the army, that means you're studying, you're not allowed to leave the country. So Rabbi Lawrence went to Ben Gurion once when he was in the Knesset, because he was a Knesset member. He went to Ben Gurion, and he said to him, the Rebbe is asked this favor, even though it's not. And Ben Gurion said, absolutely not. So he said, what difference does it make to you? He said, he's not going to be in the army anyway. So what does it bother you so much? So Ben Gurion actually answered quite a clever answer. And Ben Gurion said to him, he said, you claim that those who are studying in yeshiva do as much for the defense of Israel, if not more, than those who are in the army. If so, I want him studying here. I'm not interested in him defending America. I want him to defend Israel. So he was left, Shlomo Lawrence was left speechless. So what is he supposed to do? So he goes back to the Rebbe. He says, it's impossible. It's impossible. It can't be done. I spoke to the prime minister himself, and it can't be done. So this is what the Rebbe told Shlomo Lawrence. He said, when Jews come to me with their requests, I know full well that I can't do anything. I'm personally powerless to act. Yet I have pity on them, and I don't tell them that I can't help. Instead, I take note of what they're asking, and then I turn to God, asking him to fulfill their requests. Therefore, don't say you can't do anything. Reb Noach Weinberg used to say, I can't is idol worship. He said, because if God wanted you to, could you? Of course, if God. So when you say you can't, you're saying God can. Because if he wants it, it could be. So don't say you can't. And the Kapichnitzer Rebbe basically said the same thing. Don't say you can't do anything. You do what you can. And if God wants, he'll help. But you have to go further. You haven't done what you have to do yet. So he went to the director of the recruitment office, Shlomo Lawrence, and he told him what the Rebbe, he told him the whole story, he told him what Ben Gurion said, and then Shlomo Lawrence says to him, that's my story. And that's what the Rebbe said. I have now done whatever I can. You please do whatever your power allows you to do. And he said, I realize you don't have the power to do anything. But. This is sort of a cheap way out. But, so what happened was the guy actually enjoyed the story. The head of the crew, because he says, that lies beyond my purview, beyond my power. But I'll still try. Maybe. Right? Anyway, a few days later, the head of recruitment calls him up and he says the Rebbe's request had been granted. The guy could go to Chutz La'aretz and he should come and collect his exit permit. And he said, don't ask me how I arranged it. That's all he said. This is a lesson for us also, right? Oftentimes when we say we can't, we are not willing to push ourselves to the limit of what we could do. And we're not willing to place our trust in the Almighty that if he wants it to happen, it can. If I can't do it, certainly he can't do it. I know we would never say those words, but oftentimes when we act, that's how we act. Well, I tried everything I could, didn't work. Oftentimes we see in the world that it's sometimes when people raise their hands up and say, I can't do it anymore, God, it's up to you. When you're willing to let go of control, sometimes that says, oh, now you're going to know who it's from, The story that I told of Chaim Kanievsky was there was a fellow who had a son, a young boy who had a very, very rare disease, and there were very few doctors in the world who treated it. But there was nobody who was willing to do the surgery. They came to one doctor in Israel, and he said, "Bring me all the files and everything." And he looked at it, whatever, and he looked over, and finally he said, "Yes, I can do the surgery, and I'm willing to take your son as a patient. I'm willing to operate on him." And the guy said, thank you so much. Thank you. I said, Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, it'll be successful, And the doctor turns to him, with God's help? God didn't go to medical school. I did all this work. And I'm the doctor, and I'm doing a performance of surgery. What are you bringing God into this? Right? What a horrific thing to say. Well, this man, who was a Torah-observant Jew and believed in God, was horrified by this. So he went to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he said to him, am I even allowed to use this doctor? Someone who expresses such thoughts about God and his lack of belief in God, can I even use him? I mean, it's something to believe in God, but he doesn't. But to speak like that, ultimately, you don't need God's help. Like, I can do it myself. What arrogance. Reb Chaim thought about it. Reb Chaim said, you go ahead with what you're supposed to do. The Almighty will take care of the rest. A short while later, before the surgery was done, this doctor was giving a paper in front of hundreds of doctors in some hall in Israel, whatever, in a hospital. And while he's standing up there, he totally lost control of his bowels and in front of everybody, right there on the stage, right? And he was, as you can imagine, embarrassed, like beyond embarrassment, right? But he saw, you thought you were in control. You can't even control your own bowels if the Almighty doesn't want you to. And he wasn't like he was an elderly person or a sick person. And he called the guy up and he told him what happened. And he said, I'm happy to take your son's case. And with God's help, I know he's in control. He'll succeed in the surgery. And he did. And, this story happens to have a happy ending. He did the surgery, and it doesn't matter if it had a happy ending or not. That wasn't the point, right? The Almighty can control it. And that's the Kapichnitzer Rebbe used to encourage people. All you need is you have to trust in Hashem. There's a story that's not told in this book that I heard many years ago, and this made a profound impact on how thoughtful and how deep a love for a fellow Jew can go. The Kapichnitzer Rebbe lived on the Lower East Side, where in the 1940s and 50s, many of the Jews lived. And he's walking to shul on Yom Kippur morning, and he passes by a non-kosher restaurant, and he sees a Jew sitting in the non-kosher restaurant eating treif of food. Now, he wasn't the only Jew in the world who ate on Yom Kippur. He wasn't the only Jew in the world. But on the Lower East Side, where things were pretty tight, you go and you sit in a restaurant, and you sit by the window so that people can see you. You're making a statement, right? The Kapichnitzer Rebbe walks into the restaurant on Yom Kippur, and I know we're probably thinking, how is he going to tell them off, right? And he says to him, "A guten Appetit. Have a hearty appetite. Enjoy the meal." That wasn't what anybody was expecting to hear from him, right? So the chassid who was walking with him, after he came out, what was that? He said, "Look, this man was sticking it to God. He was trying to, right?" He said, "But there's a major, major difference when somebody does something like that. He does it out of passion or out of desire or lust or because he enjoys it, as opposed to somebody who does it just lahachas, just to stick it to God. I'm going to show you." He said, "I wish him good appetite." He said, "So this person, he's going to have to go to purgatory for what he does on Yom Kippur, non kosher, here in front of everybody. He's going to have to pay the price. But if he does it because he enjoyed the food and not to stick it to God, I want him to really enjoy it so that he can think about it and say, wow, that was right because I really enjoyed it." He said, "The fires will be a lot cooler. And he'll have less Gehenna." Again, what a way to think about it. Yeah. It's not good if I would do the story, you would do the story, but just the thoughtfulness that he had for somebody else, and he cared about this guy who was eating in a non-kosher restaurant on Yom Kippur in front for the public to see, and he still loved him. That's Ahavat Yisrael. That's love. That's love for a fellow Jew. He used to say that he was just a soldier in Hashem's army, and as I said, he never kept his money overnight. He tried to give away to tzedakah, whatever he can, even when he had great debts. He once went to Eretz Yisrael with a whole bunch of money, but this is a very interesting story. In 1953, he came to Eretz Yisrael, and he had a lot of money, but there were two places that needed his money. One was a yeshiva in Kfar Ata that needed to open up, and the second one, there was a certain place that needed a mikveh, and he only had the money for one. So he went to the giant of the generation, he went to the Chazon Ish, and he said to him, "What should I give it?" Now, we know generally a mikveh takes precedence over anything else. If there's only money for one thing in the city, for a school or a shul, the mikveh comes first, because you can't have Jewish life without a mikveh. So the Chazon Ish said, "Give it to the yeshiva." See, okay, what the Chazon Ish explained, he said, if you give it to the yeshiva, he said, you can be sure that in the future, as a result of that, there'll be many more mikvahs built. Because those people who are learning yeshiva, they will perpetuate Jewish life, and there'll be more mikvahs around. You give it to the mikvah in that small place, we don't know what's going to happen. So he did. He gave to the yeshiva, but then when he came back to America, he raised the money for the mikvah and he sent it to the mikvah. Yeah. Again, not something that most people would do. His heart flowed with love of Hashem and with love for the Jewish people, really in such a beautiful way. Notice that he also used his closeness to Hashem and to people to bring fellow Jews back to Torah, back to observance. But notice that all the stories that I tell you, none of them are about the greatness of his Torah learning or his building yeshivas or his building institutions. This was a bird of a different feather. I don't mean to be insulting to him, God forbid. But this is like totally different. I'm going to close with one story. He had a brother-in-law, the suicidal Rebbe, and they wound up in Vienna. As I told you, they were there. And when the Germans came in, the Austrians they brought people to Vienna. They made the Jews go on the streets of Vienna, the cobblestone streets. I don't know if you've seen the pictures. I've seen the pictures. And they made them scrub the streets of Vienna, right, to clean the streets of Vienna. And they gave them small brushes sometimes. But the toothbrush, whatever, they really have to get down. So A, it was painful. B, it was degrading, right? And some of his followers and the suicidal Rebbe's followers saw this. Aside from the fact that there was, he said, how could they be doing? The Rebbe's should be doing this. So they worked out a deal with the Nazis that they would let them not do it, but others would take their place. I don't know what else they got in the trade, what else the Germans got in the trade, but there would be Jews who would take the place. So they came to the Rebbe. The Germans said, you can go, you're free. He said, what happened? So they said, so they were very happy. Obviously they didn't, but when they heard that there were going to be other Jews taking their place, they said they wouldn't do that. Other Jews should suffer because of me. So what if I have a title already? And they continued scrubbing and they refused to stop it at the expense of someone else. Again, a great sensitivity. Many people, oh, it's not befitting the Rebbe. There was no such thing. They couldn't see the suffering of another person. And he said that when he was taken into the first camp, that he came to the labor camp, he said he was able to withstand. He was okay. He had to work and it was painful. But the suffering of the other Jews bothered him more than the pain that he suffered himself. So this is a great man. With the stories we tell, some of them you might think are beyond your reach, but they're lessons in Amunah, they're lessons in love of a fellow Jew, lessons in sensitivity, lessons in chesed. And even if we're not going to be as great as him, hopefully today we can reach just a little bit higher as we grow in our service. Thank you.